Joining me now for in-depth analysis of the summit is canon lawyer and priest of the Archdiocese of New York, Father Jerry Murray, who joins me here in studio. And with us by Skype is editor-in-chief of thecatholicthing.org, Dr. Robert Royal. The Papal Posse rides again. Gentlemen, thank you both for being with us. You attended the summit, Bob. Now, at the end of this summit, the Pope had this message. He claimed that he was going to have an all-out war on abusers, and that the wrath of God would be delivered on these people. And then he spent a lot of time contextualizing abuse, talking about abuse in families and at school. Your reaction to that final message and this summit as a whole before we break it down piece by piece?
Yeah, I have to say that I was quite shocked, actually, when I saw that final discourse by the Pope, because there's, as they know over in Rome, there's a great deal of anger and frustration in the world, not only here in the United States, but in many parts of the world right now over the abuse crisis. And to start out with a very long list of sort of globalizing, contextualizing, you know, that there was abuse in schools, there was abuse by sports coaches, that there's abuse in all sorts of other contexts. It struck me that that was really off message, and that what he really needed to do was to focus down on the responsibilities of the church. It's the church that is under the lens of examination right now, and he needed to come at that. And then I also think that the suggestions that he made were not all that forceful. That you know, he took a number of the sort of best practices at the World Health Organization and other institutions.
Yeah, we're going to get to those point by point in a moment, Bob. So you don't have to go through them now. But yeah.
Right. But in any event, there are others who are already working in those ways. And really, the focus has got to be in the church itself. What steps, what concrete things are now going to come forward? I agree with Ed Penton entirely. There are many good things that were suggested. Maybe they'll be followed up on. We all are a little bit cynical because we've heard a lot of happy talk in the past. So, yeah, you know, we have this conclusion that sort of points in a stronger direction. The wrath of God is something that he almost never talks about.
Right.
We'll have to see if that actually results in something.
Father Jerry, I want to bring you in on this. The Pope did have that kind of forceful finish, but the specifics were very few. Some are even asking, I spoke to some people who attended the summit, they said, why did we even need this summit? Your thoughts?
I was disappointed by the final document, Raymond, for a number of reasons, one of which was the word bishop never appears. This summit was not simply about priests who act badly. This summit was supposed to be about priests who act badly and then are covered up by their bishops. In other words, the bishop is responsible for not taking proper action. That was not dealt with. The Pope did refer to cover-ups. We don't need to have them, but really, if you're going to be direct, you're going to say bishops have a responsibility that in many cases they have not acquitted. Now, if you ask me in the general proposition, is there anything different now, a week after the synod, than there was the week before? And the answer is not really. And that is a cause of concern because, you know, having what we might call a gab fest where everyone talks, but then there's no voting on resolutions, there's no entertainment of canonical specifics that could be adopted. That, I think, was a mistake because sensitizing people to the evil of sexual abuse is something that's already gone on in the church, and it's gone on largely due to the media reporting on the bad things in the church. We need the church to take action to respond to that crisis.
But the fact is, the only party that can really take action against bishops who are offending is the Pope himself. You're a canon lawyer. No congregation can do it. No group of bishops can do it. It has to come from the Pope. And it seems that really important piece of information was lost this week. They made it sound like, you know, the bishop in Poughkeepsie can somehow, you know, intervene and stop all of this. He can't. He has no power to do so.
Right, and the issue again gets down to we have a track record of bishops who protected evil-doing priests. And the McCarrick case is a perfect example. Now, granted, the initial complaints against McCarrick regarded sexual abuse of adults, seminarians, but then we found out later he was also abusing minors. If he had been dealt with effectively when the first complaints came across, we wouldn't have this tragic story I'm playing right now.
Robert Royal, you heard from Ed Penton. There was a little in the way of dealing with questions regarding homosexuality in the priesthood or the abuse of adults or young adults in the church. What did you think of that? Is that a missed opportunity here at this global summit?
Well, obviously, yes. The emphasis on power, I wrote this in a column in the Catholic thing. I regard this as a kind of a Marxist approach to the problem, that what we have here is actually a differential of power, which there is, of course. I mean, I wouldn't want to deny that. But the problem is not solely one of power. If a priest or a bishop were to beat up a child, that's power. That's violence. That's just abuse. To have sex with a child means that there's a power disparity, but there's also a sexual element here, and we can see that the way that they run scared from the very question of homosexuality, which is so central. It's obvious. A number of secular commentators have talked about this. That unless they address this, they're not really looking to the core of the problem. So the way that this thing has been configured from the very beginning, and the emphasis on this power differential, I think just immediately sets us off on the wrong foot. And it's not surprising if you set out on the wrong foot that you don't arrive really where you need to.
Father Jerry, I want to play you something. This is Cardinal Reinhard Marx, who is a member of the Papal Inner Circle. He was one of the key figures at this summit, despite his own history and the history of the German Church. Here's what he said. Watch this.
The sexual abuse of children and youth is in no small measure due to the abuse of power in the area of administration. Files that could have documented the terrible deeds and named those responsible were destroyed or not even created. Instead of the perpetrators, the victims were regulated.
He also called for the Vatican to change its legal code of secrecy and to come up with new statistics on crimes against children and young people. How do you do that if you don't have files, or if the files are missing or destroyed?
I'm glad the Cardinal admitted what has happened in other places, happened in Chile, files destroyed, hearings held without any records, so no records kept, so we can get to the truth of it. My dissatisfaction, though, would be the following. Eminence, if you identify the files have been destroyed, you should also identify who did them and tell the people that they're no longer in a position to do that again. It's not enough to lament that things were handled poorly in the past. You have to hold accountable the ones who did it, make sure they can't do it again. This is outrageous. Now, as regards canonical norms only have effect when people treat them as law and not suggestions. And we know that from the experience here in the United States. Again, the McCarrick case. McCarrick committed grave offenses against seminarians, and the answer was, sign a confidentiality agreement, we'll send you a check. And that's what happened in the case in New Jersey. Those dioceses paid off, and McCarrick continued as Archbishop of Washington even when that happened. That's the problem. If you treat canon law as a suggestion, well, it doesn't have to be done.
It's a heartbreaker. I think some victims I spoke to resented that they were writing off their pain and the deep tragedy and wounds in their lives as an administrative error, as a clerical, as a clerical problem.
Error.
It's far deeper than that.
But, my goodness, the priest is there to get people to heaven, to hear their confession, give them Holy Communion. He's committing sexual abuse, and then you're saying, well, there's no record of it, and we're not going to deal with it, and I'm sorry, it was an administrative error. Not an administrative error. It's an outrage.
Bob, I want to play something for you. You were at this summit. It was interesting that you had Cardinal Sean O'Malley present, who is head of the Vatican's Office to Protect Young People, has been doing this, running that shop for years. He was not allowed to speak at this summit. He had no speaking role, but suddenly Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle shows up from the Philippines. I want to play you a little bit of his address. He really repeated a lot of what I would call Pope Francis's greatest hits. Listen.
The wounds of the risen Christ carry the memory of innocent suffering, but they also carry the memory of our weakness and sinfulness.
Bob, your take on this. Why was Cardinal Tagle featured so prominently? I don't recall him having some, stellar record in the Philippines, either pro or con, on this issue.
Well, the way that the summit was structured was very interesting, because in the mornings, usually the first presentation would be something more like that emotional appeal to whatever the suffering was, or the need for purity, or the need for people to engage personally with this problem. And then it would be followed up, and I actually made a joke about this. The first day was collegiality, and the second day was synodality, and the third day was transparency. And actually, it was very funny because Cardinal Marx, before he made these remarks that Father Murray was commenting on, said if it had been up to him, he actually would not have chosen that topic. He changed it in the middle. He talked about traceability. This is why he was, where are the files? We have to be able to trace these things because the church is not going to just open to the four winds. So I think that it reflects the Holy Father's kind of initial approach always is that kind of personal engagement, rather than a kind of reflection on theology or moral theology, and even the reflection on the changes in structures that are needed. We heard over and over from all sorts of people last week that changing structures alone won't do anything. Well, of course, we want things beyond that, but we want structures to be changed too, because that would be a very good beginning if we could put together the way the American founders thought very carefully about the structure of our Constitution. How do you hold different people responsible who are going to hold power? Right. There are going to be offices where one person is in power over another, and so how do we structure ourselves as much as we can? We have to ultimately rely on the virtues of people and the honesty of people to make these structures work. But the change of structures is not a trivial matter.
Father Jerry, we keep talking about this, and this whole summit really addressed this as if this abuse is something in the past or something to hold at arm's length. We are hearing reports right now, this week, the nuncio of Paris charged a second time, accused of abuse. You have this Archbishop Jose Quiros in Costa Rica, also under investigation. This is ongoing, and again, we're not talking about priests, we're talking about bishops. What should be done? You had this Sister Veronica Openibo of Nigeria, who got up and said, we need to publish, come out and not only find these people, but publish and let the world know when they're relieved of office and what happened, to be transparent. Is that part of the answer?
Canon law has a justice system for the church, but it's basically treated as a private matter. So if a bishop gets accused, as for instance Bishop Bransfield, formerly of Wheeling, West Virginia, we're told he's under investigation. Okay, there was no delineation of the charges beyond a vague reference to sexual abuse of adults. But we should know, for instance, he's being investigated by this body, there's a time limit, they're going to interview witnesses, he's going to face these charges, and if he's found innocent, we're going to announce it and say these charges aren't substantiated, or otherwise we're going to say they are. Right now, there are many bishops throughout the world being investigated. We don't know how many they are, the specific charges. The nuncio in Paris, Ventura, was accused back in January. Now there's a second accusation coming forward. Why are we learning these things from the media? Why isn't the Vatican announcing on a regular basis, the criminal justice system of the Vatican has the following people under investigation? In other words, we have to get this out of the realm of a private, basically hidden process into a public matter like we do in the justice. Indictments are public in the U.S. You get indicted, the government announces that you've been indicted.
And on what
Not
grounds?
the press. The press doesn't ask the government, was anybody indicted today? No, the government says, these people were indicted today. That's how it should be with the Vatican.
That's the transparency we need.
Because then we're responsible for administering justice according to established standards, not this idea, well, the Pope will decide if he's going to get investigated here, there, by whom. That's not adequate. That doesn't give the appearance that we're really seeking justice in an active, rapid way.
And we learned in the build-up to this summit, a third of the people who were charged, those cases were dropped or the penalties were removed for those individuals. And that was, it seems that came directly from the Holy Father. In the name of mercy, wanting to be merciful and giving these people a second chance, he often waived the penalties in a third of the cases.
This is really bad. If a priest is found guilty by the doctrine of the faith of having committed sexual abuse of minors and then asked to be pardoned, the answer should be no. For crying out loud, would we ever allow a school safety officer in a public school who was convicted of abusing one of the students to then ask the governor, please pardon me, I want to go back and work in the school? We would say no. Being a priest is a high honor with a large responsibility. You shouldn't treat it as a matter of sympathy that he lost his career because he got caught. That's a bad way of looking at it.
Robert Royal, very quickly, I want to run through the final, if you can say there were final concrete actions coming out of this conference. Many of the victims groups were deeply, deeply dissatisfied. They claim there's no substance here, but Austin Ivory, in a piece, the papal biographer, listed what he believes are progress coming out of this. Here are his points. We'll put them up on the screen. I'll get your quick reaction. One, the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith will produce a small handbook so that every bishop in the world will understand his obligations exactly. And if bishops don't fulfill those obligations, they'll be removed. Robert Royal, your reaction.
Well, that particular provision, you have to understand in a kind of a global context, because I did hear from many people who know different parts of the world that we in the United States, and I've said this many times, we're kind of advanced in our dealing with the priestly abuse problem, not the bishop's problem so much. But in many parts of the world, they don't have canonists, they don't have people who can follow these things up. So they called this a vade-mecum. It is a handbook. If there's a charge, you do this, then you do that, and then you dispose of it in a certain way. But I agree with Father Murray entirely on this, that when you put forward these sort of general ideas like that, they have to be respected as law. It can't simply be regarded as kind of suggestions. And in fact, Archbishop Scicluna, in one of the very earliest interventions, said when you set up a structure, and this was his sort of general, what are we going to do now? Well, if you set up a structure, he says, then if you're a bishop, and maybe even if you're a pope, he kind of suggested, you have to let it function. You can't intervene in a process and have someone from on high say, well, we're not going to go down, we're not going to investigate that guy, number one, that's happened, or we're not going to go down that process. Or somebody who I knew in Argentina came to me and told me my phone has been hacked, and those selfies, those sexual selfies, somebody is attacking me. Well, I mean, there ought to be a regular process. It shouldn't just be personally, oh yeah, I know you, and let's do this in a personal way, just us. That is not a rule of law. That is a rule of men, and it's been disastrous in the past for the church, and it has to stop.
Father Murray, you want to react to that little handbook?
Yeah, no, a handbook is useful. I won't deny that. But the procedures are already given by Pope Benedict XVI. If there's an accusation that's judged credible against a priest, then it's brought forward. If there's canon law, if any judgment against a bishop is reserved to the Holy See. So the nuncio, if a bishop gets accused, nuncio's informed. It goes from there. What we do need, though, is more specific standards of law for judging the credibility of accusations, specific standards for evidence gathering. What does it mean, for instance, to interview a witness? Is that done by a secretary? Is that done by an untrained priest? We have to have people who know what it means to investigate crime, to report it, and then to bring it to the attention of the Vatican. And then furthermore, as regards the bishops, it has to be clear. When a bishop is accused and the nuncio sends it on, the Vatican has to get back to the nuncio and say, we're taking these steps. And then the nuncio should be told, I'm going to announce to the people of the United States, on behalf of the Holy See, Bishop X has been accused, he's under investigation, this is what's happening. And then also say, further information, if you have it, give it to me, because I want to help the Vatican.
Very quickly, I want to run through the second point that Austin Ivory raised. He said there's something concrete coming out of the summit. He says that a proposal from Cardinal Blaise Cupich would make it easier to denounce or investigate or report on a bishop's failure to act. Now, this is the Metropolitan plan. We heard so much about it at the last bishops' conference that, frankly, it didn't look like there was much traction for it. Why is that a good idea or not a good idea?
This is complicated, Raymond, because metropolitans mean it's the archbishop who then is superior
in that region.
Over a region, over bishops in smaller dioceses. So historically, they've had a supervisory role. In canon law, actually now, practically nothing. So they're trying to revive the office. The problem here is, in 3 cases we know about, Cardinal Law, Cardinal McCarrick, and now Cardinal Wuerl, they're all metropolitans. So the issue is, really, the local bishops are not the ones who are going to be able to supervise themselves. It has to be the nuncio acting on behalf of the Holy See, and that's the way I think it should be. But the nuncio's a busy man. My proposal, we've talked about it on here, a national tribunal regarding sexual abuse and cover-up crimes, appointed by the Holy See, with a mechanism to report to this tribunal accusations. Then you'll have a promoter of justice equal to a prosecutor who follows up. That's when you get the lay people involved, because then the promoter of justice says, I'm hiring investigators, I'm hiring forensic experts, I'm hiring people who are psychologists, can interpret the sentiments being expressed here, blah, blah, blah. What do you come out with? A more professionalized system where the bishops are not supervising themselves, the Holy See is supervising them through this tribunal.
Very clever idea. Robert Royal, your reaction to the Metropolitan notion very quickly.
Well, I thought it was very interesting that I think it was a woman from NBC who exactly made this point about McCarrick and Cardinal Law, both being Metropolitans back in the past, and then how do we hold them accountable? There does seem to be, and I know that a lot of people out there are very frustrated, as I myself am, by the whole process and by the results of this summit. But there does seem to be at least some talk among certain bishops' conferences. And again, America is in a bit of a different situation because our people are a little bit more advanced in how they're handling this. We have large numbers of canonists who know how to at least begin the process. So there seems to be at least the beginning of a conversation about this, that there might be these tribunals that Father was just talking about, or other lay boards that would supplement the oversight of the Metropolitan. So if that happens, and again, we have to say that the talk is good, and it's good that we're trying to figure out how would this work, how would it not work. The talk is good, but we're going to see the proof has always got to be in the pudding.
Yeah. I want to run through very quickly. The Pope had 8 points that he offered to this body to combat sex abuse. I'll put them up on the screen just so the audience is in on the same conversation here, and then I'll get your general reaction. He says, a change of mentality to focus on protecting children rather than protecting the institution. 2, a recognition of the impeccable seriousness of the sins and crimes of consecrated persons. 3, a genuine purification beginning with self-accusation. 4, positive formation of candidates for the priesthood in the virtue of chastity. One hopes that's going on now. 5, strengthening and reviving the guidelines by episcopal conferences, reaffirming the need for rules. 6, the accompaniment of those who have been abused with an emphasis on listening. 7, ensure that seminarians and clergy are not enslaved in an addiction to pornography. And 8, combat sexual tourism around the world. Father Jerry, your reaction to those suggestions?
I can't disagree with any of them because they're all good, but are they to the point? And this is where I'll come back to this issue again of homosexuality. Sexual immorality by male clergymen has manifested itself primarily in abuse of teenage boys, okay? So when we're talking about looking at seminaries and seminary formation, we have to root out those who, in the own words of the Holy See, have deep-rooted homosexual tendencies. They should not be allowed in the priesthood. The reason is they cannot, because of those tendencies, be entrusted with the spiritual care of males who could be subject to their advances. Now, are we sliming people and saying homosexuals are going after teenagers more than others? The answer is the statistics show they are interested, priests, in committing crime with that group of people. Some people say, well, they don't have the same access to girls. People who are not interested in having sex with girls doesn't matter whether they have access to them.
Right.
This is what Cardinal Muller, Cardinal Burke, and Cardinal Brammuller are all saying. We have to identify that homosexuality is not a neutral category that can just be treated with kid gloves. It's a serious deficit in someone's life, and they shouldn't be allowed into the priesthood if they have not successfully integrated that into their life. That's what I think is most important here.
Robert Royal, your quick reaction to the Pope's 8 suggestions, but also picking up on what Father Jerry was saying, there was a big piece in the New York Times about priests who have children, who father children, and they were trying to conflate abuse of minors with a priest who fell in love with somebody, had a child, and then returned to ministry. Your thoughts on both those issues?
Well, in many parts of the world, the abuse problem or the lack of chastity among priests is a heterosexual problem. It's only in certain places that it seems to have turned toward a homosexual problem. So Father's emphasis, I think, is exactly right. Of those 8 points, like him, I too couldn't object to any of them. I mean, who can object to, pointing out that the problems of sex tourism or the internet or whatnot? But for me, The heart of it is, I think, number 2, where he talks about whoever it is, whosoever it is, must be held accountable. Now, Inez San Martin of Crux brought up the point that how can we take seriously when the Holy Father himself says this, when we see that there are cases back in Argentina and other places.
Hold that thought, Bob. I'm going to play that bite for you. Hold that. I'm going to roll it now and get your reaction. Watch this.
Archbishop Chicluna, you said that Pope Francis wants to raise the age for which the Church considers porn involving minors to be a grave delict. We know that there's a bishop in Argentina, Sanqueta, who had gay porn in his phone involving young people. How can we believe that this is, in fact, the last time we're going to hear no more cover-up, when at the end of the day, Pope Francis covered up for someone in Argentina who had gay porn involving minors? I mean, can we actually believe that this is going to change now?
Well, I'll quote what the Holy Father said this morning about the law. About the case, I'm not authorized. I mean, yeah, I don't have information about the case you mentioned, but if it's somebody's investigating a case, they're not covering it up.
Bob, your reaction?
Well, I saw that interchange, and I thought it was very interesting when it actually took place. Look, what we know so far about the Zanqueta case is that it was presented in 2015 to officials in the Vatican, and in 2017, the Holy Father knew about this. He seems, even the people who brought the accusations from Argentina say that the Holy Father was manipulated by Zanqueta, who was a friend of his, and I think he was under spiritual direction, or the Pope was his confessor before he became Pope.
Yes.
But this goes again to the question of structures and following the law, because if what seems, at least to me, to be very strong evidence, when somebody brings in a phone that has nude selfies or something on it, if that can be kind of waved away by a Pope because he's talking with somebody he knows personally, and the guy says, somebody hacked my phone. We have to follow procedures here. This is where I think Father is exactly right. That if we are a church of mercy without a respect for truth and for procedure, we're really emphasizing one side of the gospel without the fullness that we need to actually exist properly as the Church of Jesus Christ, the church that he founded in the truth. So this is going to be a complicated subject to work out. I don't believe at this point that anybody in the Vatican thinks this thing is going to go away. They would like it to go away. Yeah. But I think even these specific cases are going to come back again and again, and are going to force some reckoning. If not at the highest level, there still will continue to be a drumbeat in the media.
Father Jerry, your reaction. Argentina is particularly problematic. You have this case with Zanqueta. There's another case that we don't even have time for, but a model in Argentina claimed, and she was accusing a dear friend of the Pope who started an organization for sort of runaways and kids on the streets. She claimed she had interviews with people talking about this guy being an abuser, okay? And she went public with it. She was found dead this week in Argentina. There are a lot of, I guess the charitable word would be shady characters in this, certainly in the Argentinian scene. Where are we here? And does this undermine the Pope's credibility or ability to clean up this mess in the eyes of Catholics?
Well, look, there were 3 themes that were given for this summit meeting: responsibility, accountability, and transparency.
Right.
Yet, on the Zanqueta case, they were not ready to answer reporters' questions. And you have to say to yourself, how can you say we're going to be transparent when a matter that is of grave urgency in the media and in the minds of the faithful is basically said we're not going to talk about that? Now, Bob is absolutely right here. The facts that we know about Zanqueta do not paint a good picture to the Pope's handling of the matter. The Pope in the Chile case, where he protected Bishop Barros, admitted he was wrong after he got further evidence. So what I think is incumbent on the Pope and his advisors to say, we want all the evidence now. We want to have a thorough investigation. The witnesses who gave testimony in Argentina should be flown over to Rome, should be heard, and then the Pope rapidly should come out and, as in the Barros case, said, yes, I was wrong, or no, the witnesses aren't credible. Either one, that's justice. But to simply say, we're not going to talk about it. I'm not authorized. I don't know what's going on. During the synod questioning, or the summit questioning, someone asked, how many bishops are currently under investigation? And they've said, we don't know.
We don't know.
Now, you can't be in a media age saying we don't know. And if you don't know, then the next sentence is, but we'll tell you tomorrow.
Right. Yeah.
But I have a feeling nobody really knows how many bishops are under investigation.
Well, I had a journalist who was there in the room was texting me while that portion of the press conference was going on. They said, I think this is what they mean by synodality.
Oh.
Nobody knows. Anyway,
Oh, my.
Bob, very quickly, I need to talk about this very serious and tragic matter of Cardinal George Pell in Australia. He was apparently convicted in December of sexual offenses involving minors. Now, some say this verdict is improper, that it was, you know, the first trial was a hung jury. This one, he was unanimously convicted. Your thoughts on where this is and what do we know about this case? He's in prison right now, awaiting final sentencing on March 13th.
Yeah, in fact, he's in a high security prison. I don't know if that's because they regard him as dangerous. I mean, he's in his 70s. It just seems to me that that's kind of ridiculous, unless it's to protect him, because that could also be a consideration. Look, the first trial, he was almost exonerated. It was 10-2 in his favor. Mm-hmm. And usually, as I understand it, in Australia, when a prosecutor sees that the juries are not going for it, they don't retry it. But in this case, they did. They seem to push this very hard with the jury. There seem to be all sorts of facts available that make it appear impossible that the one charge that has been brought against him actually is true. And yet, nevertheless, 12 fellow citizens in Australia found him guilty. Now, I happen to like George Pell, and I'll confess that, and my sympathies are with him. But we have to look at the facts here. As I understand the legal system in Australia, and maybe Father knows something more about this, there's a panel of judges who can review a case like this and say that, you know, this is sort of an irrational decision. We don't know why the jurors did this, but they can overrule it. And I think that may happen. You notice that the Vatican has a very different approach to this than they did to the McCarrick case. And I hear from friends in Australia that even the Australian media are being very cautious about what they say about this because they don't feel confident about this latest verdict. So it looks like it's a travesty and a grave injustice, but I think at this point we're just going to have to wait for it to play out.
Father Jerry Murray.
Yeah, I agree with Bob's comments. You know, I'm a big believer in the jury system. It's one of the inheritances of English law, and it is one of the most effective ways to guarantee the equal administration of justice. But that doesn't mean juries can't make bad mistakes or be swayed. If the facts are such, as the lawyer for the cardinal and his supporters say, then they should have an easy time convincing this panel of judges that the jurors acted wrongly in applying a standard that the law didn't give. We'll just wait and see.
Yeah, there are fishy things about this case. One of the victims, the second victim, is dead, and it has been reported that he admitted to his mother before his death that no abuse took place. Pell did not abuse them. But again, that's hearsay. It's in the media, but you don't know what's what. We'll let this shake out and see what the final verdict is. Before I let you both go, where are we here on this sex abuse matter? Where do we go next? Father Jerry's suggesting a tribunal with the empowered and impaneled by the Holy See in every country?
Yeah, every country, absolutely. And you could have multiple countries where they're the same language and things of that sort, but certainly the United States, one.
Bob, what would you suggest?
Well, I think we just need follow-through. As I said earlier, we've got some conversations started. I know there's a lot of frustration out there because people write me all the time about this and say I'm too optimistic, but I'm not optimistic. I'm hopeful. We exist in a world created by God, and He's come to earth and redeemed us. And so I'm hopeful that not in the short run, and I doubt that whatever reforms we get are going to go all the way up into the Vatican. And I think that's a lot of frustration that people feel. That specifically over the McCarrick case, there's people wish we could find out what actually happened there. But I think there are openings here. And some of the bishops I talk with in the United States think that there is enough here that they can work with it. Whether they'll succeed at this or not, we ought to all pray and be down on our knees and just hope that we deal with this horrible thing that's an incubus on the church.
Yeah, well, I am hopeful that we can get together and discuss something other than sexual abuse once in a while. I have to tell you, personally, it is so dispiriting. I'm sure for you, Father Jerry, particularly, as a member of the clergy, it's depressing. It's depressing to have to cover it, think about it, and delve into it every week. So here's hoping we get to cover something more uplifting in the days ahead. Robert Royal's commentary, as well as Father Jerry Murray's, can be found at thecatholicthing.org. Thank you both for being here.